Let us start off the session by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. We are resuming the discussion that we of the Brahmajala Sutta. So page number 47. I know that some of you might have had questions with regards to what we have discussed previously. So after today's discussion, I will allow for questions at the end, so you can ask any questions that you so have. Right, so we are moving on to the third section of the sutta, which deals with the ditthis from 9 to 12. Right, so the doctrines of world's finitude and infinity. Right, Antananta Vada or extensionism. Good. So there are bhikkhus, some recluses and brahmins who are extensionalists. They proclaim the world to be finite or infinite on 4 grounds. And based on what, invoking what, do the good recluses and brahmins proclaim the world to be finite or infinite on 4 grounds. The first, the extensionists, finite, bounded universe. Here bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin, by means of exertion, by means of striving, by means of devotion, by means of diligence, by means of right attention, he touches mental concentration or attains to mental concentration, such that he dwells perceiving finitude in the world. He says thus, the world is finite, bounded by a circle. What is the reason for this? I, by means of exertion, by means of striving, by means of devotion, by means of diligence, by means of right attention, having touched mental concentration, such that I dwell perceiving finitude in the world. Through this, I know thus, the world is finite, bounded by a circle. This bhikkhu is the first reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite, meaning with the scope that one has or one is able to sort of muster with the attainments that one has been able to personally achieve, one takes the reasoning or the end of that thought or whatever that person is able to see as the main sort of governing condition of the whole world. Right, wholly based on what that person's attainment or achievement is able to sort of show him of or regarding the universe. Right, that is what it sort of goes into. The extensionists, infinite bounded universe. And secondly, bhikkhus, based on what? Invoking what? Do the good recluses and brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. Here bhikkhus, a certain recluse or brahmin, by means of exertion, by means of striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, attains mental concentration, such that he dwells perceiving infinitude in the world. He says thus, the world is infinite, unbounded. Right? Before it was the world is finite, bounded by a circle. Here the world is infinite and boundless, right? Unbounded. Those recluses and brahmins who say thus, this world is finite, bounded by a circle, they speak falsely. What is the reason for this? I, by means of exertion, striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, having attained mental concentration, such that I dwell perceiving infinity in the world. Through this I know thus, the world is infinite, unbounded. Thus, bhikkhus is a second reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite, right? The extension is finite and infinite universe, right? Now, as we go on, with regard to the 4 sections of this category, we find that whatever view that a person, due to or being subjected to or as a result of whatever sort of doctrine, perceival, understanding, due to one's individual sort of attainments or understanding, grabbing hold of and thinking that this is the ultimate, or this is the end result, or this is the sort of the proper sort of the evaluation with regards to the universe, falls under or comes into a form of wrong view or ditthi, right? This is predominantly because, now if you remember, the way that we, in the attainment of nibbana, right, one of the first things that we sort of sought to get rid of is the wrong view that we have, right? We go through a process of cleansing, starting by the fact of the wrong views, right? In that part, now, in that process of cleansing, if one is sort of attached or is clinging on to one specific view, it might be something which is fun. Now, if we say, for example, if we are to take let's say infinite universe, right? If we are to take infinite universe as an example, it doesn't say much about karma, it doesn't say much about anything else, right? But there is a thought of or pattern of belief to say, that this is what I have seen, and because I have seen this with whatever practices that I have developed, this is what it is. It speaks about, first of all, the amount of attachment that one would have to what one thinks is right and wrong. Clinging on to that self, clinging on to that sort of self sense of being in that pattern of form is something which takes you away from the sense of nothingness, sunyata, what takes you away from the need to sort of get rid of or exhaust the self attribute in this sort of nama rupa that we have, right? It is that which then sort of hinders the attainments or achievements that we sort of look forward to through the practice. That is why having one of these views can sort of end up in you not really being able to progress upon the path towards Nibbana. Moving forward, the extensionists, finite and infinite universe. And thirdly, bhikkhus, based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin, by means of exertion, by means of striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, having attained mental concentration, such that he dwells in the world perceiving it as infinite, vertically, upwards and downwards, and infinite, laterally, across, right? He says thus. Those recluses and Brahmins who say thus, the world is finite, bounded by a circle, they speak falsely. And those recluses and Brahmins who say thus, the world is infinite, unbounded, they speak falsely too. This world is both finite and infinite. What is the reason for this? I, by means of exertion, striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, having attained to mental concentration, such that I dwell in the world, perceiving it as finite vertically, but as infinite laterally. Through this, I know thus the world is both finite and infinite. This bhikkhus is a third reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins are extensionists, proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. The reasoner inquirer, the universe is neither finite nor infinite. And fourthly, bhikkhus, based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse and Brahmin, is the reasoner or inquirer, fabricating it through reasoning, having investigated it through mental inquiry by way of its own wits. Now, that part is very important. By way of his own wits, he says thus: this world is neither finite or infinite. Those recluses and Brahmins who say thus, the world is finite, bounded by a circle, they speak falsely. Those recluses and Brahmins who say thus, the world is infinite, unbounded, they speak falsely too. And those recluses who say the world is both finite and infinite, they speak falsely too. The world is neither finite or infinite. This bhikkhus is a fourth reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. It is on these four grounds, bhikkhus, that these recluses and Brahmins who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite. Whatever recluses or Brahmins there may be who are extensionists proclaim the world to be finite or infinite, they do so on the four grounds or on any one of them. There is none beyond this, right? Refrain. Now, this bhikkhu, the Tathagata understands, and he understands thus. These standpoints, thus grasped, thus misapprehended, will lead to such a future destiny, to a state beyond. And thus the Tathagata understands, he understands too what transcends this, yet he does not misapprehend thus that understanding. And because he is free from wrong grasping, he has known for himself the cool state. Having understood as they really are, the arising and the ending, and the gratification and the danger, and the escape regarding feelings, the Tathagata bhikkhus is free through non-clinging. These truths, bhikkhus, are deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, peaceful, sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be known by the wise, which the Tathagata, having realized for himself through direct knowledge, declares it. And those who rightly praise the Tathagata in accordance with reality would speak of them, right? Would speak of them. Now, I am interested to know what you understood out of these four, right? What you understood out of these four sort of ditties. Would anyone like to share their views on what these four, or what it is trying to come or get at with regards to the four that we have done with regards to infinite and finite and infinite universes? Any ideas? Miri, yes?
Is it just to say it depends on one's perception and level of understanding that we hold on to these wrong views? Each person will, even the people who meditate and with their own effort, they can only reach so much depending on their past both their karma, their thought processes, and their experiences. And therefore, they can only understand to a certain extent or to a certain level. That's what I thought from this.
Okay. Okay. Let's see what the others think. Okay. Miri has given us an opinion. Now, how about anyone else? You can unmute your mics if you have something. Or is Miri sort of, did Miri share what most of you then think?
I think that what she said was the same thing that I had in mind. Almost the same, not exactly.
Okay, what was not exact then, Sujata?
I was thinking of the space.
Okay.
I mean, no one can gauge the space of space. So I thought it's something similar, where we think that we shouldn't know really.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I feel.
Anyone else? Shriyani?
I wonder whether it is based on Hindu belief. And
that is that is absolutely sure. It is very much based on Hindu beliefs, right? It is very much based on Hindu beliefs, and actually beliefs now with regards to the universe. The Hindus did also sort of, before the Hindu beliefs, there were sort of foundations which laid foundation to Hindu beliefs, right? Which was then done by the Vedas of the Rishis, beings who existed far before Hindu and Brahmin beliefs, right? So which they then laid foundation for Hinduism, Brahmanism, and then Hinduism, which then followed, right? So yes, absolutely, Shriyani, right? Anyone else who would like to add, or have we sort of covered? So yes,
is it further than that? Maybe immaterial jhanas, actually. When certain people achieve 4 level of immaterial jhanas, and they interpret the world as what they explain in this way, right? Is it something to do with that level of jhanas?
I would, Damsiri, I wouldn't be as specific, but I would say yes. Because now remember that story, I think last week or so, I told of that monk who was meditating and he sort of forecasted the future. That would very much fall into this.
Yeah, okay.
Things of that scope. Now, what is repeated? What is repeated in these 4 classes? It is what is repeated. Now, let's revisit it. By means of exertion, striving, devotion. So the practice.
Yes.
I have this practice. I have reached, and then at the end, I have reached to a mental status, and through which I see this, and so this must be it. Right? And so this must be it. Now, if you do also remember when this arahant, he was for 500 lives, he was in Nirodha Samapatti. And I'm sorry, Asanya Satta. Right?
Asanya Tala.
He was a right, in the plane of non-perception, right? So when he was going backwards, or rather visiting his past lives, what happened, or what he couldn't see. Now, Asanna Satta, when you are born as an Asanna Satta, you can't see that bird. There's nothing to see. Right? Because that plane or body of non-perception is maintained by the karmic energy of the bhavanga of the previous life before you were a sannyasa. Right? So it was like a skip. You skipped a whole sort of group of lives that you had and went all the way back, and the monk was confused, like, what happened? Right?
Mhm.
Right? Now, this was an achieved, attained monk. He could not see. Then what happened? Now, as the stories goes, or stories of the time, what happened? In the most traditional way, they got up, went to the Buddha, explained what happened, and the Buddha related what that was about. And the Buddha says, nothing to fear. It is because you were born in this place that you sort of skipped all of those years and went to the life before that, right? But there was another monk who did not have the ability to go beyond it. Do you get it? Right? Who did not have the ability to go beyond that sort of stretch of asannisatta births. So he couldn't see anything, right? And he was utterly confused. Now you see, achieved, attained, meditative absorptions ticked, right? Yet, because of certain sort of lack of practice, of course, I mean, not everyone will have a practice as strong as Sariputta, Moggallana Theros, right? Or the Buddha, right? We won't even go to compare themselves. So even though certain people are attained to a certain level, now even Silabbata Paramasa falls into this. Even, now most of us having sort of come here from, or being here because of our roots to traditional, cultured Sri Lankan, South Asian heritage, we know the things that our people do. We know the things that we all do, right? With the Gurunvanses and the Kapuas and the Kattadiyas and, all of these people. That also falls into this, right? Because it is a fact of believing just because a person has this mental absorption, attainment, achievement does not mean anything else for you, right? Or does not mean that this person is all-knowing, all-seeing, or omniscient in that way as well, right? Something that I have, and actually many monks that I have also spoken of, something that we see way too often, even within monks, is when you meditate, when you go on meditating, of course, you know that you're pure, you're clean, your mind is clear, you're good in your 5 precepts is good, all of this. But you have this because of this internal dialogue or voice or whatever it is, when a decision is taken or when a decision is made, you cling very hard to that decision. For example, when we sort of the power of intuition, right? The power of intuition. When within spiritual circles, the power of intuition is taken very, very seriously, right? But because of the power of intuition, I see someone, I don't have a good feel of this person. So what do? You trust your power of intuition. You don't give that person a second chance. Again, so what do we see? We see this again, this ditti again, right? That is, I believe, the core of what this specific teaching is giving us. Of course, it speaks about the universe, it speaks about being an extensionist, right? But the crux of that is when you cling on to, based on your achievements, whatever it is that you have done, does not literally mean that you know everything else. We must understand that we, although our minds might be developed than that mundane person who does not meditate, we are not as developed as all-seeing Buddhas or anything under that, right? So we have to have that openness of mind, that sort of humility of mind, which will allow us to sort of be able to learn and keep on learning and change whatever it is that arises in our mind. That is what I feel is within this doctrine and this that we have gone through these 4 stages, right? Yeah. So, all right, shall we move on? Hold on. All right, moving on. Page 49, doctrines of endless hedging. Amara Vikepavada. There are bhikkhus, some recluses and Brahmins who are endless hedgers, right? Endless hedgers. So what is hedgers, right? Amara Vikepika, or endless evocators, right? Which is down there in the footer, right? The word Amara has 2 senses. Undying. Amara is a name that we often see. Undying Amara, and not subject to death, and 2, a kind of fish difficult to catch. Both senses applies here, right? Who wriggle like eels. Okay, so let's go on and see what this is. When questioned about one point or other, they resort on 4 grounds to evasive statements and to endless hedging. And based on what? Invoking what? To the good recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort on 4 grounds to evasive statements and endless hedging, right? I don't know, maybe this also would ring a bell for you, the Samanya Phala Sutta, right? The Samanya Phala Sutta is, is, if you remember, with the heretics who Ajatasattu was communicating with, this is what happened. So let's see what happens. Yeah? The ignorant, endless hedgers who fear false speech. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin, do not understand according to reality. This is wholesome. He does not know according to reality. This is unwholesome. This occurs to him. I do not know according to reality what is wholesome or what is unwholesome. If I, not knowing according to reality what is wholesome or what is unwholesome, were to expound what is wholesome or what is unwholesome, on that account, desire or lust or hate or aversion might arise in me, right? Might arise in me. Should desire or lust or hate or aversion arise in me, that would be falsehood. On my part, should there be falsehood for me, I would be vexed. Such vexation would be an obstacle for me. As such, out of fear of speaking falsehood, loathing false speech, he does not expound what is wholesome or what is unwholesome. And when questioned about one point or other, he resorts to evasive statements and endless hedging thus. I do not take it as this. I do not take it as that. I do not take it as otherwise. I do not take it to be not so. I do not take it to be not so. This, bhikkhus, is the first reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort to evasive statements and endless hedging. it is more common than you think. It is more common than you think, right? Moving on. The ignorant, endless hedger who fear clinging. And secondly, based on what invoking, what do the good recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort on four grounds to evasive statement and to endless hedging. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin do not understand. According to reality, this is wholesome. He does not know according to reality. This is unwholesome. This occurs to him. I do not know according to reality what is wholesome or what is unwholesome. If I, not knowing according to reality what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, were to expound what is wholesome or what is unwholesome, on that account desire or lust or hate or aversion might arise in me. Should desire or lust or hate or aversion arise in me, that would be clinging on my part. Should there be clinging in me, it would vex me. Such vexation would be an obstacle for me. As such, out of fear of clinging, loathing, clinging, he does not expound what is wholesome or what is unwholesome. And when questioned about one point or other, he resorts to evasive statements and to endless hedging thus. I do not take it as this, I do not take it as that, I do not take it otherwise, I do not take it to be not so, I do not take it to be not so. This because is the second reason based on which, invoking which some recluses or Brahmins, when questioned about one point or the other, resort to evasive statements and endless hedging, right? And the other is the fear of being cross-sectioned, right? Now, before we move on, remember, having the ground of thinking or based on the grounds of thinking that a certain thing leads to whatever hindrance, right? Whatever hindrance, we do not practice it. Thinking of a certain hindrance, we do not practice it. For example, within, now we know forest traditions, right? Forest traditions, not in Burma, but Thailand and Sri Lanka, right? In Thailand and Sri Lanka, predominantly within the forest traditions, right? We find views such as this. This is important to know. What are the views? Knowing the Dhamma leads to ego. And we try to get away from ego. Hence, we do not study the Dhamma. Right? Now, you might think, no, there is no place that there are. Right? There are. Right? Then we come to place that think, okay, knowing the Pali language contributes to ego. Hence, we do not study the Pali language. Knowing the Abhidhamma contributes to a scholastic ego. Hence, we do not practice the, or rather, we do not learn the Abhidhamma. Right? All of these things falls under this. Right? All of these things fall, those sort of views. Right? We find ourselves not studying the Dhamma because we fear egos. But then we find, now for example, if we are to take the Thai tradition specifically, we find, for example, the stringent nature by which they sort of maintain the robes, the stringent nature of the pirikara, the monk's sort of 8 requisites, it is unparalleled to any other Buddhist tradition across the world. So much so that the Thai tradition has an ego wholly based on those sort of requisites. Right? What about that? Now, this is what we try to, that is why this sutta is so important. It questions everything that we sort of cling on to in that way, to say, look here, is this what we actually should be doing? Is this the base of our true teaching and learning? Right? Is this the base of our true teaching and learning? This sutta questions all of that. Right? And to get away, now as we, fear of clinging, fear of false speech, right? Fear of false speech. I think some of you might know, the people who have been knowing me for, since I came. Some of you, I had a friend, I still have him as a friend. But I remember, because of the doubt that he had in mind, right? While he was walking through the forest at night, right? This was about 11 o'clock or, past that time. He did not know that if you are to sort of step on an insect or, some sort of living creature, without your knowledge, it does not break your precept. Now, for example, when we do walk in our gardens and all of that, we might be harming so many beings, right? Without our knowledge. The thing is, we can't, if we are to sort of make ourselves a cup of tea, right, and we are to spill some hot water on the floor or on the stove or wherever, there are millions of bacteria that are dying at that moment. What are you going to do, right? This is what the Buddha said with regards to the Niganta, sweeping the floor and covering the mouths and closing the eyes, right? This is where the Buddha said, where is the practicality in this, right? So this monk, not knowing or having this doubt, when his torch went off all of a sudden, battery dead, what did he do? He stood in the forest up until sunrise without moving. Right? He is a very intelligent, learned monk now, right? But that is what he did. He stood in the forest because he was so afraid of breaking. Now, that point is, of course, I would like to say it is a sort of a thought of, or that thought itself is a thought worth venerating. But I don't think the Buddha would say so, right? I don't think the Buddha would say so in terms of this guilt, what this guilt does to you. There was another monk, an American born, he was quite annoying. He was known to be annoying. So we would all avoid conversations with him because he was so annoying. Right? Why was he annoying? I will tell you why he was annoying. Right? Because he had so much of doubt. You would meet him on the road, and upon meeting him on the road, he would, tell you something. And after speaking to you, he would have a doubt whether what he spoke was the absolute truth. Right? In an absolute way. So what then he would come chasing after you, and then he would go through the explanation of the whole conversation in great detail, right? And the thing is, we have to stand there listening to him regardless of whatever we have to do, because we know that or else this fellow can't sleep. He won't be able to sleep. He will come and knock on your kuti as well and wake you up in the middle of the night saying, I can't sleep. I need to tell this to you, right? The amount of doubt which goes in, it is something which damages, which really affects people's happiness. When people, now it is very clear, these people are people who have a very sort of a true passion towards a practice, right? That is where this sort of common sense, practicality, and knowing what your true intentions come in to allow us to have a better hold over what or how we practice a Dhamma, right? Of how we practice Dhamma. So let's move on. Let's move on and then evaluate all of this after, right? And thirdly, based on what? Now, the fear of being cross-questioned. And thirdly, based on what? Invoking what? Do the good recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort to endless hedging? Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse of Brahmin, does not understand according to reality what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. So he thinks thus. I'm summarizing as I go, so I'm just brushing through the sentence because it is the same thing as we have read before, right? So he thinks thus. I do not know according to reality what is wholesome or unwholesome. Now, there are recluses and Brahmins who are wise, subtle, experienced in debate, who go about hair splitting, it seems, tearing apart the views of others with their gathered wisdom. They might cross-examine me, ask me for reasons, invite me to address issues therein. But when cross-examined, asked for reasons, invited to address issues therein, I am unable to answer them. Should I be unable to answer, it would vex me. Such vexation. Now you see, this is all coming down to how uncomfortable it will be for you, right? I would be vexed. If I am vexed, it would be an obstacle for me, right? So we are not addressing the reason as to why we become vexed, to get rid of that vexation, right? Rather, we try to avoid the whole situation itself, right? We try to avoid the whole situation itself. As such, out of fear of being cross-examined, loathing cross-examination, he does not expound what is wholesome or what is unwholesome. And when questioned about one point or other, he resorts to evasive statements and to endless hedging thus. I do not take this, basically going around. I do not take it as this. I do not take it as that. I do not take it as otherwise. I do not take it to be not so. I do not take it to be not so. This, bhikkhus, is a third reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort to evasive statements and endless hedging. Endless hedging. The dull, endless hedgers. And fourthly, based on what, invoking what, do good recluses and Brahmins, when questioned about one point or other, resort on four grounds to evasive, endless hedging. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin, is dull and stupid. On account of his dullness and stupidity, when questioned about one point or other, he resorts to evasive statements and endless hedging thus. If you were to ask me whether there is a world beyond, if I thought that it exists, I would declare to you it is so. If you were to ask me whether there is a world beyond, if I thought that it exists, I would declare to you it is so. But I do not take it thus. I do not take it in that way. I do not take it in any other way. I do not take it to be so. I do not take it to be not so. Right? This reminds me of a rains retreat that I spent with a monk that all of you might know, right, in the forest of Burma, where he was teaching me absolute nonsense of, saying that it is Abhidhamma for a course of 3 months. just because he did not want me to learn the Abhidhamma. Right? So at the end, so you would sort of feel my sentiments towards him, right? So this does happen. This, you might sometimes, when reading this, you might feel, oh, it doesn't happen that often. It actually does happen way often that you think, right? So let's go back. But I do not take it thus. I do not take it in that way. I do not take it in any other way. I do not take it to be not so. I do not take it to be not so. Whether there is no hereafter, whether there is both, whether there both is and is not a hereafter, whether there neither is no, is not a hereafter, whether there are spontaneously born beings born, whether there are no spontaneously born beings, whether there is both, whether they are both are and are not spontaneously born beings. So all towards even down to whether Tathagata neither exists nor exists after. So basically going around and around without giving a proper declaration of any sort or coming to any sort of reason, right? Reasoning. This happens a lot. Sometimes I have also seen, sometimes in Dhamma talks, the lay people do not realize this. Only the people who are really in it realize it. Sometimes Dhamma talks goes on for hours, and when you listen to it closely, there is nothing which has been said, right? There is nothing that has been said, right? Some people are absolutely amazing at doing this. It just baffles the amount of talent that they have been able to build up over the years. Nothing is being said 3 hours down the Dhamma talk. And of course, all of us, most of us being, I think all of us are Sri Lankans, right? All of us being Sri Lankans, knowing Sri Lankans, first of who Sri Lankans and most of these Asians are, what do we say? Oh, we couldn't understand anything. The Dhamma talk was so deep. The Dhamma talk is so deep. I remember a teacher of mine, when a person this was in Burma, when a person was saying, oh, this monk is so deep, that monk is so deep, all of that. And this the teacher monk of mine, I was sitting right next to him. He was like, yes, the wells and tunnels are also deep, but does not mean that there's anything in it. True. Things that are deep are also things that are dark, right? Does not mean that there is absolute substance in it. When you go to what the Buddha says, most of the time, actually, you go to what the Buddha says most of the time, when some things he doesn't, you understand it in some way, but you also know there's potential for that to go deeper. I mean, you take the first stanza of the, we'll take the first stanza of the Dhammapada. Mano pubbhangama dhamma, mano setta manomaya, manasa se paduttena. So we know, in a simple way, we know the mind is the sort of the forerunner, beyond all, before all other things. There are no deep discussions with regards to that, but it can go potentially even deeper to explain that even deeper, right? We must understand that it does not. So we get baffled on these things, which are again falls into views, into these sort of ditties that we build on, right? Now, personally, if I am to personally speak of certain, at one part, now this is something which is personal to me, right? A reason for me not to spend much time in Sri Lanka is because of the toxic popularity that you gain very easily when you are a person who sort of is a person who preaches, a person who is amongst the crowd, you gain this popularity. So I remember initially when I was, around 2014, I think, when I used to go to Sri Lanka and do all these sort of projects in Sri Lanka, my life came to a position where my phone would be ringing every minute up until 10 o'clock. With no exaggeration, my phone would ring, right? And I had 2 phones back then. How foolish. Right? So literally it was like a juggling show, right? And then when I would used to go in a car, I would always have to sit in the back with tinted windows, because all these people, even if the car was to park, they would sort of come and take photographs. They would come and sort of tap on the window and ask my number, or, whatever it is. There was no place that I could literally go without sort of being barraged by sort of all these unknown people who I did not know, but had known me from somewhere or whatever. It was so difficult, literally, for me. Obviously, I was also young and all of these things. I was not ready. I was not ready for that amount of popularity. I have so much respect for the monks who can deal with it. I can't. I don't want it. Right? I can't. Because at one point when it comes to, and also listening to all of these people on YouTube and all of them complaining about popularity and how it's so toxic, I completely understand it. But I would also say that I feel like everyone who does put up with the popularity puts up a bit of a show, right? Without a show, you cannot maintain your popularity. And that, for me, was a bit of a disgusting, toxic task to do. So what did I do? I booked my flight to Burma, did not come back for 6 months until all the fires sort of died down, and, did not do any TV channel recordings or any of that, cut that out completely. Because at one point, it eats you up. It absolutely eats you up and turns you into a person that you don't also recognize at the end of the day, right? And that is my personal experience. That is my personal experience. And that is something I think all of us should be aware of, because for me, anytime that I see a spiritual figure going too much into sort of, or into the eye of the public, I have a very big question mark in my mind. Right? Obviously, there are things that I will not tell you, right? But it is, what I'm telling you is, have that question mark in your mind as well. Because up until, if you are, we see when you come close this sense of enlightenment and all of this, these things are things which turns you off, which does not attract you. Because at the end of the day, it is such a burden. It is such a burden, right? So have that as a point when you go for your gurus and all the people that you sort of go behind, and sort of for Dhamma and all that, realize at one part, not to cling on to anyone, but to cling on to the content of Dhamma and the pristine nature of whatever the Dhamma has to offer. Right? The pristine nature of whatever the Dhamma has to offer. That is where that clinging and attachment should be. I'm using the words clinging and attachment because it's better to cling and attach onto the Dhamma than to anything else in the world. Right? Than to anything else in the world. As regards, for example, with regards to what I told you about the traditions and the clinging on to, it's better to cling on to the Dhamma, to know your Pali and all of these other things, because at one fine day, it might come handy to you when you are no longer young and you have this sort of, that you have a sense of more humility, right? A sense of more humility. We do see all of you go to different temples all across the UK. We have seen figures. Some of you have also seen me fighting with these figures in public forums. We see figures who come into sort of these places and, who would give their own interpretation into into what is and what is not. At the end of the day, it does have its dark sides, which we should be aware and we should not be going into, but that is curbed through awareness. Everything has a dark side, right? Everything has a dark side. You can turn anything and everything into both what is good, or you can make the decision to turn it into what is bad. That is not in the content, that is in your attitude here. So we progress forward and we endeavor on to reach whatever states we want to achieve through good intentions. So we move on. This bhikkhus is a fourth reason, right? Is a fourth reason. A dull and stupid person. The first one was a person who feared false speech. The second one who feared clinging. The third one who feared being cross-questioned. The fourth one who feared endless hedges, right? Endless hedges, right? Now, well, I must also say this one thing. Now, something that I realized was, now when we are close to, now something actually this happens to me very often, when I am in the presence of my teachers, I find that, I have not been in the presence of them discussing Dhamma in Burma or anything like that in any time in recent, but I realized that when we are in the presence of these teachers, whatever it is that is in your mind now becomes completely like, for example, like, you don't speak, you don't express your views, you become completely silent, right? Now that is also that's something which should not happen. Because most of the time, that happens also because of ego. Specifically, if we point to something of this within here, it is usually because of the fear of being cross-questioned, right? So that is also then something which should not happen. We should be able to put out our views in a way that we are open to discuss these views or discuss these sort of interpretations of Dhamma without the fear affecting our understanding. Because when we remember the heretical teachers, the conversations that they had when their disciples were leaving, when Sariputta went to his former teacher and told, Venerable, you can come with us. What did they say? How can I come with such a retinue of followers? They are following me. How can I follow someone? This is not something which is suitable. What is that? That closed understanding. When certain other heretical teachers vomited blood, seeing the disciples sort of leaving them and sort of going forth under the Buddha, right? These are places when we keep to our views, when we are closed up, we do not flourish, we stagnate, and everything that stagnates, even for you, if you were to spend this quarantine or isolation at home, doing nothing like a potato, not even going out for a walk, right? And all of that, and sort of not doing anything to sort of keep yourself sort of energized or anything, you'll probably end up in a depression, right? Or some sort of mental illness. Why? Because everything that stagnates rots, right? Everything. That is why we keep on going. So we must always be open to our views being questioned, right? Open to our views being questioned. Take the beautiful example of how when the Buddha would go to the temples or the places of residence of the other heretical disciples, right? Remember, the Buddha would go for Pindapata, or sometimes before Pindapata, if he has time, he would go and just sit in these places and discuss with the other sort of disciples who are, they are not the Buddha disciples, but other. And what do? They discuss, right? They discuss. What do we do? Now, if a father comes, now if a person in your family is a person who is a Catholic or belonging to any other religion, right? What do? one thing that we often do is we compare the similarities between my religion and your religion to give us a ground to say we are similar. Now, that is something that I find absolutely disrespectful, right? In these interfaith meetings that I find myself going to, when priest or imam say this, I have openly told them, please stop. You are disrespecting me. I do not need to know that there is something similar in you and my practice for me to respect you in whatever way. We don't need that, right? And also you telling me that there is a similarity. Are you trying to call me something else? Are you trying to say that I'm a Catholic? Are you trying to say that I'm a Muslim? Are you trying to say that I'm a Jew? No, I'm a Buddhist. So respect that. The other thing that we often find ourselves doing is we do not talk at all, right? Now, when we as Buddhist monks go to places that we are invited to for dana, there are other people who come and talk to us. There are the people who then stay at the back and sort of not even side the front up until the monks leave. Now, this is also something which is very rude, right? This is also something that is very rude and should not be done, right? This is common manners, right? You are there for a dana ceremony. The main people in a dana ceremony are the monks. So what do you do when the monks come in? You go and say, hello, how are you doing? Right? Nice to meet you. Just like you would have small talk with any other person. If you would go to a party of a person that, you only know one person in the party. So do you just talk to that one person? No, you go around the party and you say hello to everyone. Right? It's common mannerisms. What is another thing that we often do? I've said we do not talk at all, we stay at the back. Now, these are things that we should not. We must be open. If your intentions are pure, if you have, and as Buddhists, we do not proselytize, we do not convert people, right? We do not convert people. So because of that, we have to be that sense of openness, not to sort of go and talk religion and spirituality everywhere. No. Not to do that, but to have a sense of openness where we are able to discuss. And remember, discussing these things are fine art. An art that you must master, right? You can't just sort of drop bombs on people all of a sudden. It's a fine art that you must know how to master. Right? Give other people whatever it is, because we find the Buddha going into these places, we find these other disciples, the Sangha going into these places and having these discussions. Why? Because our motivations are pure. Remember, always go deep down into one thing. What are my intentions? What are my intentions? That is the most important thing. Right? What are my intentions? Because in the fabricated facade of purity, Dhamma, and all of these things, we tend to do a lot of things that is not really Dhammic. Right? In that facade, we do a lot of things that are not so Dhammic. Question, what are my intentions? If your intention at a particular gathering is to convert someone, or is to sort of say that my belief and faith is much more higher than yours, better just keep quiet. Because for me, something that I have realized is, all of us in this world, we try to find happiness in one way or the other. We are all here to find that sense of enlightenment, which has many definitions and varied definitions according to who is using the word. Right? Who is using the word? At one point in my life, Catholicism helped me. But in this point in my life, I have no doubt that no other religion will help me other than this. what I am practicing at the moment. I am very much convinced of that at this moment. But there was a time in my life that Catholicism, the Bible, really did sort of come into the rescue. We go through different, all of you meditate, right? There are so many Buddhists who do not meditate. For them, the normal pujas are something which is enlightening to them. But I'm for sure most of you who have been with me now for some time, for you, it will not be your cup of tea to just be doing that. Why? Because you're at a different point with a different attitude. This is not to say, I don't like to say we are in a higher place or sort of we have sort of developed from a lower place. No, we are in a different place. It doesn't literally mean or relatively mean that we are in a higher or lower place. We are in a different place. But we like to sort of always say, is it a low or higher place? Right? Is it a low or higher place? This is not about lower or higher. When we look at people that we respect, right, we like to always feel in our minds this sense of superiority. If this sense of superiority is there, it is very easy for us to respect a person. Like, for example, most of our Buddhists, our Asian Buddhists, do not like to listen to the Dhamma from lay people, right? Do not like to listen to the Dhamma from lay people, right? Now, even from lay people. Now, this is something that is against Dhamma. Becoming a monk and all of that, something that my teachers used to say is, if the devil is going to teach you Dhamma, go and worship the devil and listen to the Dhamma. Right? Even if the devil is teaching you the Dhamma, if it is a Dhamma, worship the devil first and then listen to the Dhamma. Why is that? And actually, even for a lay person, it is all right for a lay person. We know we do not sit higher than a monk, but if you're preaching the Dhamma, you can sit higher than a monk also, right? It is something that is respect. Remember, the Buddha did not enter the hall. He stood outside in respect of the Dhamma which was being taught inside the hall, remember? Right? That is, for us, it is not the person. It is the Dhamma which is being translated. And that is what is being said. If you see between the lines of all of these ditties, right? Because of the fear of this, and this, I do not do this. So what is the attachment to this, and this? Right? To this egocentric nature of the mind. In the great, grand scheme of the universe, we are only tiny specks of beings living here. We have discussed, we have gone through the worlds. There are a lot of the theories, Dhamsiri mentioned. After Dhamsiri mentioned, I also did a bit of research. A lot of the theories with regard to the universe points to actually what Buddhism says now, it seems. Right? That there is that first of all, they do say that humans have come from another parallel universe, right? From a different sort of space altogether. They do say that this is not only one universe, there are countless amounts of universes beyond this. And in these universes also exists beings such as ourselves. We can't be the only planet with a sun and water supply, no? Right? Literally, what has allowed life on Earth is the sun and the water supply. Right? So which has a love for the minerals and all of this. It can't be that we are the only people. In regards to all of this, remember, in the grand scheme of things, right, we are very tiny specks. A therapist sent me a message yesterday, an occupational therapist. She asked me, Bante, how do you handle when you get all of these people with different sort of problems coming to you with these different problems, which can be quite sort of difficult problems, even for you to sort of see, even when they lose legs and, accidents and all of these other things, how do you deal with these things? Most important for me, what rang into my mind was, do not feed the story. The first thing. We see a certain thing with a story already. Do not feed it. Because usually when it comes to different problems of friends, family, loved ones, known and unknown, neighbors, all of these people, we tend to always feed a story or put our story on it. No need of that. What happened? How are we moving forward? Those are the only two things. Right? That is what I told her. What happened? How are we moving forward? When that comes into play, nothing else really matters. Because in our life, we have things to do. Right? You can't be meditating with 100. If you have 101 friends, you can't be meditating with 101 problems in your head. How do you then go forward? Remember the Buddha, he had 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 monks who had left all of their wealth, who had left their families and children, who had left their kingships and ministerial positions, who had literally left everything for what the Buddha had to teach. Just imagine if the Buddha was like me and you and I, the Buddha would not be sleeping. Right? The Buddha would burn out. The Buddha would be having migraines and headaches and cancers. But why wasn't any of this present? Because no story was being given. The teaching was authentic and pure. The path of life was clear. So what happened? There was nothing to be stressed out on. How do we move forward? Right? My story for it is not the important part. You might come to me and tell Bhakti, this has happened. I am not going to think, okay, I'm not going to be thinking after you keep the phone, okay, she might be saying this, but this. No, I am not concerned. How am I going to make you feel better? And if your loved ones are involved, how am I going to tell you something that will bring your loved ones together or to heal those relationships? Because for me, I am not living with your family, right? And I am hearing what you tell me. That is the situation that you are in, right? This is very important. The story that we relate to all the things that happens around us, right? That dialogue is very important. Now, Mala had asked me a question, right? Mala, do you want to repeat the question to me so that everyone else knows?
Bante, at the class we had last time, you mentioned when the lifespan of the universe is over, the beings who had been sort of living on earth, they go to Abhasara Brahmaloka.
Yeah.
And then you said, not all of them go to Abhasara, some are thrown out of the Chakravala. Who are the beings who have been thrown out of the Chakravala and for what reason?
Yes. So with the sort of the towards the time, it is said that there are going to be different sort of sights and sort of signs to people to say, look here, the world is coming to an end. Do what you have to do, right? Meaning sort of pushing people towards meditation, spirituality, and all of those things, right? But the animals are not going to be able to go up to Abhasar plane if it is going to, is the world ever going to be free of all these worms and animals and specimens and all these people, all these beings, right? Not all the humans are going to be able to go in, but most of them would. But most of them, with regard to the animals, actually animals and all of them, they would be, because there is no, with the destruction of the world, before the destruction of the world, their pull, their magnetic pull would shift from this world into a different cluster where that cluster will not be destroyed. Right? It happens, but at the time that the burning or whatever would happen, there would be no beings here. Right? There would be no beings here. Everyone would sort of make their way out. Right? Which also would say that the pattern, after a point, the pattern of thinking would shift so drastically that they would now be reborn in a different world. When you are reborn in a different world, coming back to this is going to be something that will almost happen with most impossible circumstances. Right? Most impossible circumstances. Why? Because just imagine living in, being thrown out of this cluster, out of the Mangala cluster, and then associating those beings for more millennia and millennia, right? You would your pattern would change. Your Dhamma would sort of drain out of you. You will not have all of these other things sort of governing. Right? So slowly then it would, after a long time, you would come back to certain or be pulled into Dhamma again, right? But after a very, very, very long time. Remember this, after the destruction, the universe must also form, no? Right? So how long would that be? So that is what I meant by being thrown out, Mala. Yeah?
Right. Okay, then when the new universe comes into effect, a new earth forms, and the beings from the Abhasara, they come back to earth, do they bring their own karmic baggage with them? The same karmic baggage?
Absolutely. But their karmic baggage, because of the Abhasara plane, because of the high meditative achievements, it has a very, very strong protective barrier from negative karmas. Right? But with time, just as mentioned in the Aganya Sutta, right? With time, it will all resurface again. And there we go on the whole roller coaster ride all over again.
And what I don't understand is, when they come back, do they come back as intelligent beings, or just like bacteria, like what Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe says? Because according to science, it starts as a unicellular and then there's evolution. But when they come back from Abhasara, how do they come? In what form? As intelligent beings or like unicellular beings?
They come as, remember the mansion, right? They come as beings with, of course, a higher state of body, but not as bacteria, as we know it in Dhamma. Because they will at the time, it will come. Maybe Chandra is referring to more of the organisms which have to form before the arrival of these beings, because we find that the planet, the Earth, if we are referring to the human plane, if we are referring to Earth, we find that there is a layer of nutrition, right? Yeah. And all of these things, maybe it is more to do with that sort of bacteria that goes on to form. But the being, because at one point or another, there must be a higher being formed for even these specimens of bacteria, specimens with a vijnana, consciousness, to gain rebirth as a human. There must be a sign of human. You know what I mean? Now, for example, a fish, let's say, all these fish in the deep, dark ocean, right? In the deepest parts of the ocean, you find all these weird fish, right? Which looks quite scary also, some of them, right? these fish, they can't be reborn. Now, if we are to take a fish in the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest place on earth, that fish can't be reborn as a human in America, in one lifetime, right? What will happen is slowly the sign must come to them. Aramuna, right? The sign must appear to them, and slowly they make their way to sort of the human realm again. But that sign must be there. Now, for example, dogs, have a very high propensity to become human. Why? All of that, all of that. So so the thought about, for example, when remember about, I think in 3 or 4 years ago, there was a it became popular thought that having dogs and pets in your house would result in you becoming an animal in your next birth, right? And it did create a lot of havoc in Sri Lanka, because all these people were throwing their pets out on the road, right? And so most of these pets, dogs in Sri Lanka, because there were no shelters to take them, so the authorities were killing them, right? So what happens there is the aramana. Just because you like something, you are not wishing, now just because you love the pet at home, you're not wishing, oh, may I become a dog too, Kilani? Right? That intention must be there, right? That intention must be there, right? That is very important to know. So even, for example, from the Abhasara plane to the human realm, or out of the human realm into the other cluster of universes, all of this happens through attitudinal change and intentions, right? What draws our energy? What draws our energy? Right? So even now for all of you, some of you had the time to practice, some of you don't, but are trying to make most of whatever it is that you want to do through Dhamma, right? Realize, even though you might have, I don't know, your friends might not be knowing, you might be having a lot of complications in your life. But as you're going through these complications, just know for yourself, right? Just know for yourself that these complications are going to end either before you die or as you die. Right? Now listen to what I'm saying. These complications will end either before you die or as you die. However, it will end. Remind yourself that what is most important to you should be your mental liberation. Because at the end of the day, by whatever means, these complications finish. And being sort of mature people who have decades of experience under their belts, you know that when you have gone through, we have all gone through experiences that we thought might never end, but always did end. And we moved into a different new phase of our life. In that way, we motivate ourselves to know that the most important thing at the end of the day is the mental liberation. So we are drawn to it. We find ourselves working towards it subconsciously, as well as sort of within our intentions, when it would, if it does come to our next birth as well, right? That is very important. Do we have any other questions? Mala, it's clear, yeah?
It's clear now. Thank you, Bhante.
All right.
Bhante, your explanation about this, the fish born again in America, I think that's a very good explanation. You should have a driving force. So that's the thing. I never had that idea before. So I can see now it's more sort of more acceptable way of explaining.
Yes,
So
and you, I don't know if you've heard Rich Dad Poor Dad. You know, he uses a very similar example to say the poor will always remain poor, the rich will remain rich, right?
okay,
It is very rarely that the poor cross over to the rich.
yeah,
Why is that? Because of the lack of attitudinal change.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
so even for example, we are born into families that might be very angry families, that are not so virtuous families. All those different things, right? All
Mhm, mhm.
and then what
Yeah,
happens? We choose to live in that same pattern of thought.
yeah.
It is when we change that pattern of thought that we start excelling.
Yeah.
You know, that is why now as a monk, you know, the you are given a different name, you are given a different costume, right?
Yeah.
Why is that? That is for that.
Yeah.
You know, not to build not for a cult, not to sort of segregate ourselves from the rest of society. It is given because you're given a different name. And of course, in the West now, friends of the Western Buddhist order, friends of the Western Buddhist order, whether Vinaya Rakkhita, Dhamma Rakkhita, we start the East London Buddhist Center. Now they, you know, very, very wealthy Buddhist sect in the West, right? It was a Sri Lankan monk, a British monk who was ordained in Sri Lanka who started it. And you know, this fact of giving people names and all of that, you know, really help people to sort of leave their previous sort of lives and operate at a higher degree of attitude.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is to create that attitudinal change. All right, Damsel.
Thank you.
Devika?
No, I just wanted to mention, Bante, that the way you explained about the end of the world and, you know, some beings coming from the Apasara, like that, I learned it the same way when I learned Abhidhamma earlier, long years back in Sri Lanka. He also explained the similar way, you know.
Yeah.
And that person coming, and then, you know, subsequently they the world expands, and again all these things happen, envying people and stuff, until Dhamma is found again in the world. So I just wanted to casually mention that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions that you might be having? Good. All right. So then I will see you all in our next class.
On Saturday.
On Saturday. On Saturday.
For meditation.
Yes, for meditation. Right. And take care and goodbye and all the very best. Yeah.
Thank you, Bante.